Rarely does a president confront so much peril: the catastrophe in Israel, the war in Ukraine, and no help from a paralyzed Congress. Late Thursday, we met President Biden at the White House. It had been a rough week, and we could see it on him. Mr. Biden will be 81 next month, and he has said that when he's tired, his lifelong stutter can creep back in. But he wedged us into his schedule to express his commitment to Israel after the massacre of more than 1,000 civilians 8 days ago. 29 Americans were killed, 15 are missing, and at least a small number of them are known to have been taken hostage. In a video call on Friday, Mr. Biden had this message for Americans in Israel whose loved ones have vanished.
We're saying we're going to do everything in our power to find those who are still alive and set them free. Everything in our power. And I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but we're working like hell on it.
Why do you feel so strongly about speaking to these families personally on Zoom?
Because I think they have to know that the President of the United States of America cares deeply about what's happening. Deeply. We have to communicate to the world this is critical. This is not even human behavior. It's pure barbarism. And we're going to do everything in our power to get them home if we can find them.
Friday's hour-long call with 14 families included a father who told us the president answered desperate pleas with empathy and patience. Is getting the American hostages back safely among your highest priorities now?
Of course it is, but it's hard to make distinctions. The most important thing is ending this brutality and to hold those who committed it accountable.
To confront the brutality, Mr. Biden ordered 2 aircraft carriers plus cruisers and destroyers to the region. There are about 900 U.S. troops in Syria on a counterterrorism mission since 2015. Can you foresee U.S. troops in combat in this new Middle East war?
I don't think that's necessary. Israel has one of the finest fighting forces in the country. I guarantee we're going to provide them everything they need.
Because of what we're seeing in the Middle East, is the threat of terrorism in the United States increased?
Yes, I had a meeting this morning with the Homeland Security people, with the FBI, for the Situation Room for the better part of an hour to discuss how we make sure that we prevent a lone wolf and or any coordinated effort to try to do what was done in synagogues before, do what was done to Jews in the street. And so we're making a major effort to make sure that doesn't happen.
Saturday, October 7th, has been called Israel's 9/11. More than 1,000 Hamas terrorists from Gaza smashed through a border wall to commit mass murder. Families in their homes, crowds at a concert, people in the street. Israel is striking back with the largest bombardment of Gaza ever. More than 2,000 have been killed by Gaza's count. Certainly, about 1,200 Israeli civilians were killed in the initial attack, but now Hamas fighters and Palestinian civilians are being killed in the counterattack. Is it time for a ceasefire?
Look, there's a fundamental difference. Israel is going after a group of people who have engaged in barbarism that is as consequential as the Holocaust. And so I think Israel has to respond. They have to go after Hamas. Now, Hamas is a bunch of cowards. They're hiding behind the civilians. They put their headquarters where civilians are in buildings and the like. But to the extent that they can separate out and avoid, I'm confident the Israelis are going to do everything in their power to avoid the killing of innocent civilians.
Hamas is an Islamist terrorist group and the government of Gaza. Gaza is 25 miles long and averages 5 miles wide. Israel severely limits its economy, so most Gazans are destitute. Now, Israel has cut off food, fuel, electricity, and most water, and has ordered 1 million Gazans to evacuate to the southern half of Gaza. The UN warns of a humanitarian disaster. There are about 2 million people in Gaza. As you know, Mr. President, 2 million people trapped. About half of them are children. Are you asking Israel to establish a humanitarian corridor in that area or get humanitarian supplies?
Yes, our team is talking with them about that and whether there could be a safe zone. We're also talking with the Egyptians, whether there's an outlet to get these children and women out out of that area at this moment. But it's hard.
You would like to see a humanitarian corridor that allows some of the 2 million Gazans out of the area?
Yes.
You would like to see humanitarian supplies brought into Gaza?
Yes.
So you do not agree with the Israeli total siege of the Gaza Strip?
I'm confident that Israel is going to act under the rules of war. There's a standards that democratic institutions and countries go by. And so I'm confident that there's going to be an ability for the innocents in Gaza to be able to have access to medicine and food and water.
Would you support Israeli occupation of Gaza at this point?
I think it'd be a big mistake. Look, what happened in Gaza, in my view, is Hamas and the extreme elements of Hamas don't represent all the Palestinian people. And I think that it would be a mistake for Israel to occupy Gaza again. But to going in and taking out the extremists, the Hezbollah is up north, but Hamas down south is a necessary requirement.
Do you believe that Hamas must be eliminated entirely?
Yes, I do. But there needs to be a Palestinian Authority. There needs to be a path to a Palestinian state.
That path, called the two-state solution, has been U.S. policy for decades. It would create an independent nation next to Israel for 5 million Palestinians who live in Gaza and on the West Bank of the Jordan River. And you believe Israel would pursue that after what's occurred?
Not now. But I think Israel understands that a significant portion of Palestinian people do not share the views of Hamas and Hezbollah.
Hezbollah is a powerful Islamist militia to Israel's north, which is armed and trained by Iran. Iran also supports Hamas. There's limited fighting already on the northern Israeli border, and I wonder, what is your message to Hezbollah and its backer, Iran?
Don't
come across the border. Don't escalate this war.
That's right.
Is Iran behind the Gaza war?
I don't want to get into classified information, but to be very blunt with you, there is no clear evidence of that.
At this point, no evidence that Iran is behind any of this.
Correct. Now, Iran constantly supports Hamas and Hezbollah. I don't mean that. But in terms of did they have foreknowledge? Did they help plan the attack? There's no evidence of that at this point.
The president is asking for billions of dollars for Israel and Ukraine. But Congress is paralyzed. Hard-right Republicans are obstructing the election of a Speaker of the House. Does the dysfunction that we've seen in Congress increase the danger in the world?
Yes. Look, this is not your father's Republican Party. 30% of it is made up of these MAGA Republicans who are maybe, democracy is something they don't look at it the same way you and I look at democracy.
Are the wars in Israel and Ukraine more than the United States can take on at the same time?
We're the United States of America, for God's sake. The most powerful nation in the history, not in the world, in the history of the world. The history of the world. We can take care of both of these and still maintain our overall international defense.
Russia's unprovoked invasion occupies nearly 20% of Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands have been killed or wounded. In an interview last month, President Volodymyr Zelensky told us he could lose without U.S. aid. How do these wars in Israel and Ukraine relate to the safety of the American people?
Overwhelmingly, they relate. For example, in Ukraine, one of my objectives was to prevent Putin, who has committed war crimes himself, from being able to occupy an independent country that borders NATO allies and is on the Russian border. Imagine what happens now if he were able to succeed. Have you ever known a major war in Europe we didn't get sucked into? We don't want that to happen. We want to make sure those democracies are sustained. And Ukraine is critical in making sure that happens.
Mr. Biden told us images of October 7th reminded him of the Holocaust, which he has studied, taking his family to the Dachau death camp in Germany. This is 2015. The man in the wheelchair is a Dachau survivor. Behind Mr. Biden is the president's granddaughter.
I wanted my children and grandchildren to fully understand exactly what happened and why you couldn't deny the carnage going on if you were living in Germany and in Europe.
Why do you feel so strongly? What does Israel mean to you?
The Jews have been subject to abuse, prejudice, and attempt to wipe them out for over 1,000 years. For me, it's about decency, respect, honor. It's just simply wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. It violates every religious principle I have in every way, and every single principle my father taught me.
As we spoke to the president, his Secretary of State was in Israel, his defense secretary was at a NATO meeting on Ukraine. America's oldest president seemed tired from directing all of this, but he was very clear on what he stood for and how his policies, in his view, would see America through. Mr. President, given these two wars and the dysfunction in Congress, are you sure that you want to run again?
Yes, because I'm sure, look, when I ran, I said, the world's at an inflection point. The world's changing, but we have an opportunity to make it. So imagine if we were able to succeed in getting the Middle East put in place where we have normalization of relations. I think we can do that. Imagine what happens if we, in fact, unite all of Europe and Putin is finally put down where he cannot cause the kind of trouble he's been causing. We have enormous opportunities to make it a better world.
Summer was going so well for the president, the White House threw a party last week with a concert by James Taylor. Mr. Biden's streak began in June when he signed a bipartisan gun safety law. Then in August, over Republican objections, he signed the largest investment ever on climate change, a minimum tax on corporations, a law to lower prescription drug prices, and student loan forgiveness. But Tuesday, as James Taylor sang Fire and Rain, it seemed like both descended on the president's party. The Dow plummeted nearly 1,300 points after a dismal inflation report. At the White House on Thursday, we spoke to President Biden about the economy, Ukraine, those top-secret documents in Donald Trump's home, and whether Mr. Biden will run again. The president made news and will ignite a few controversies. Mr. President, as you know, last Tuesday, the annual inflation rate came in at 8.3%. The stock market nosedived. People are shocked by their grocery bills. What can you do better and faster?
Well, first of all, let's put this in perspective. Inflation rate month to month was just an inch, hardly at all.
You're not arguing that 8.3 is good news.
No, I'm not saying it is good news, but it was 8.2 or 8.2 before. I mean, it's not, I can make it sound like all of a sudden, my God, it went to 8.2%. It's
the highest inflation rate, Mr. President, in 40 years.
I got that. But guess what we are? We're in a position where for the last several months it hasn't spiked. It has just barely, it's been basically even. And in the meantime, we created all these jobs and prices have gone up, but they've come down for energy. The fact is that we've created 10 million new jobs. Since we came to office. We're in a situation where the unemployment rate is about 3.7%, one of the lowest in history. We're in a situation where manufacturing is coming back to the United States in a big way. And look down the road. We have massive investments being made in computer chips and employment. So, look, this is a process. This is a process.
Is the economy going to get worse before it gets better?
No, I don't think so. We hope we can have what they say, a soft landing, a transition to a place where we don't lose the gains that I ran to make in the first place for middle-class folks, being able to generate good-paying jobs and expansion, and at the same time make sure that we are able to continue to grow.
And you would tell the American people that inflation is going to continue to decline?
No, I'm telling the American people that we're going to get control of inflation. And their prescription drug prices are going to be a hell of a lot lower. Their health care costs are going to be a lot lower. Their basic costs for everybody. Their energy prices are going to be lower. They're going to be in a situation where they begin to gain control again. I'm more optimistic than I've been in a long time.
Sir, with the Federal Reserve rapidly raising interest rates, what can you do to prevent a recession?
Continue to grow the economy. And we're growing the economy. It's growing in a way that it hasn't in years and years.
How so?
We're growing entire new industries. We're 695, I think it is, or 85,000 new manufacturing jobs just since I've become president of the United States. Continue to grow the economy and to continue to give hard-working people a break in terms of we pay the highest drug prices in the world of any industrialized nation, making sure that Medicare can negotiate down those prices. By the way, we've also reduced the debt. We reduced the deficit by $350 billion my first year. This year, it's going to be over $1.5 trillion reduce the debt. So to continue to put people in a position to be able to make a decent living and grow and increase their capacity to grow.
To see what he means, we went with Mr. Biden to the Detroit Auto Show last Wednesday. He celebrated his new funding of a network of charging stations for electric vehicles. But the newly crowded convention center brought a different question to mind. Mr. President, first Detroit Auto Show in 3 years.
Yeah.
Is the pandemic over?
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. But the pandemic is over. If you notice, no one's wearing masks. Everybody seems to be in pretty good shape. And so I think it's changing, and I think this is a perfect example of it.
The car show was a reminder that gasoline prices hit a historic high last June, in part because Russia cut fuel supplies in its war on Ukraine. Mr. President, the price of gasoline is down about 26% from the $5 high. What can you do to keep that price down while Vladimir Putin is throttling energy supplies?
There's a couple of things we've done. For example, remember I got some criticism for releasing 1 million barrels of oil a day from a strategic petroleum reserve. And then along came the industry saying they'd produce another 1 million barrels a day by the spring. So I think we're in relatively good shape.
Vladimir Putin is going to try to break your will on Ukraine and use energy prices to do it.
Sure he is. But, you know, we, the United States, are in much better shape than anyone else is, and relative to Russia particularly. But he's been trying that for a while. He's not going to succeed. Anybody want to go to Washington, jump in.
But at this very moment that Mr. Biden steered for the future, a 19th century form of transport threatened to wreck the economy. A deadline for a national rail strike was 2 days away. The White House brokered a deal Thursday after a 20-hour marathon of negotiations.
One of the things that happens in negotiations, particularly if they've been elongated like these have, is people say and do things where their pride gets engaged as well. And it's awful hard to back off of some of these things. They both sat down, in my view, and they were in the office today, saying, well, we finally figured out this is fair on both sides. And it took that time to focus, and the alternative was just not thinkable.
What do you mean?
If, in fact, they had gone on strike, the supply chains in this country would have come to a screeching halt. We would have seen a real economic crisis.
The other crisis on the president's desk, Ukraine, was also improving last week as Ukrainian forces recaptured about 3,000 square miles from the Russian invasion. Is Ukraine winning the war?
Ukraine, through the significant help we and our allies are giving them, and the incredible bravery and the incredible determination of the Ukrainian people, are not losing a war, and they're making gains in certain areas. Winning the war in Ukraine is to get Russia out of Ukraine completely and to recognize its sovereignty. They're defeating Russia. Russia's turning out not to be as competent and capable as many people thought they were going to be, but winning the war, the damage it's doing, and the citizens and the innocent people are being killed, it's awful hard to count that as winning.
After the horrors of 7 months of war, President Biden has called Russian President Vladimir Putin a war criminal.
It has been barbaric what he's done. His attacks on civilian, everything from civilian hospitals to people's old age homes, to neighborhoods where just ordinary people live.
Schools.
In schools, it's just outrageous. And so the price Ukrainian people are paying for this war is extremely high, but we're going to stay with them as long as they need our help.
You're already north of $15 billion in terms of those commitments. How far do you go?
As long as it takes.
Ironclad commitment.
Yes.
As Ukraine succeeds on the battlefield, Vladimir Putin is becoming embarrassed and pushed into a corner. And I wonder, Mr. President, what you would say to him if he is considering using chemical or tactical nuclear weapons.
Don't. It will change the face of war unlike anything since World War II.
And the consequences of that would be what? What would the U.S. response be?
You think I would tell you if I knew exactly what it would be? Of course I'm not going to tell you. It'll be consequential. They'll become more of a pariah in the world than they ever have been, and depending on the extent of what they do will determine what response would occur.
On the same day we spoke to the president, Putin met with China's leader, Xi Jinping. There's concern that Russia's attempt to force reunification with Ukraine could inspire China to attack the island of Taiwan. U.S. policy since 1979 has been to recognize Taiwan as part of China, but remain silent on whether the U.S. military would defend the democratic government there. This is among the places where our interview runs into controversy. What should Chinese President Xi know about your commitment to Taiwan?
We agree with what we signed on to a long time ago, and that there's a one China policy, and Taiwan makes their own judgments about their independence. We are not moving, we're not encouraging their being independent. That's their decision.
But would U.S. forces defend the island?
Yes, if in fact there was an unprecedented attack.
After our interview, a White House official told us U.S. policy has not changed. Officially, the U.S. will not say whether American forces would defend Taiwan, but the commander-in-chief had a view of his own. So unlike Ukraine, to be clear, sir, U.S. forces, U.S. men and women, would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion?
Yes.
For the first time, Mr. Biden spoke about the classified documents that the FBI found in former President Trump's home. The Justice Department has opened a criminal investigation. Have you been briefed, sir, on the top-secret documents that were found at Mar-a-Lago?
No.
No one has come to you to warn you that important national security secrets were revealed by the storage of those documents at the former president's home?
I have not personally spoken to anyone in that regard. I'm sure my administration is aware of all of that, and so is the National Security Council, but I am not.
Were you notified of the FBI's execution of a search warrant at Mar-a-Lago?
No, not ahead of time.
The FBI spread the documents out on a floor to make a record of what was found. When you saw the photograph of the top secret documents laid out on the floor at Mar-a-Lago, what did you think to yourself, looking at that image?
How that could possibly happen, how anyone could be that irresponsible. And I thought, what data was in there that may compromise sources and methods? By that I mean names of people who helped, or et cetera. And it's just totally irresponsible.
And you don't know what was in those documents?
I have not asked for the specifics of those documents because I don't want to get myself in the middle of whether or not the Justice Department should move or not move on certain actions they can take. I've agreed I would not tell them what to do and not, in fact, engage in telling them how to prosecute or not.
When we come back, a surprising answer to the question of whether President Biden will run for a second term. At the White House last Thursday, President Biden told us he hopes to retain control of the House and the Senate in the midterm election in November. But given the president's job approval rating of around 40%, that remains to be seen. For his part, Mr. Biden has said he plans to run again in 2024, but here is another place where our interview may cause controversy. Sir, are you committed to running again, or are there certain conditions that have to be right?
Look, if I were to say to you, I'm running again, all of a sudden a whole range of things come into play that I have requirements I have to change and move and do.
In terms of election laws?
In terms of election laws. And it's much too early to make that kind of decision. I'm a great respecter of fate. And so what I'm doing is I'm doing my job. I'm going to do that job. And within the time frame that makes sense after this next election cycle here, going into next year, make a judgment of what to do.
You say that it's much too early to make that decision. I take it the decision has not been made in your own head.
Look, my intention, as I said to begin with, is that I would run again. But it's just an intention. But is it a firm decision that I run again? That remains to be seen.
Mr. President, you are the oldest president ever.
Pretty good shape, huh?
Which leads to my next question. You are more aware of this than anyone. Some people ask whether you are fit for the job. And when you hear that, I wonder what you think.
Watch me. I mean, honest to God, that's all I think. Watch me. If you think I don't have the energy level or the mental acuity, then you know, that's one thing. It's another thing of just watch and you know, keep my schedule, do what I'm doing. I think that, you know, I don't, when I sit down with our NATO allies and keep them together, I don't have them saying, wait a minute, how old are you? What did they say? You know, I mean, it's a matter of, you know, that old expression, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. I mean, I respect the fact that people would say, you know, you're old. But I think it relates to how much energy you have and whether or not the job you're doing is one consistent with what any person of any age would be able to do.
How would you say your mental focus is?
Oh, it's focused. I haven't, look, I have trouble even saying to myself, my own head, the number of years. I no more think of myself as being as old as I am than fly. I mean, it's just not, I haven't observed anything in terms of, there's not things I don't do now that I did before, whether it's physical or mental or anything else.
You have had a string of legislative successes recently.
How's an old guy do that?
But your approval rating in the country is well below 50%. And I wonder why you think that is.
This is a really difficult time. We're at an inflection point in the history of this country. We're going to make decisions, and we're making decisions now that are going to determine what we're going to look like the next 10 years from now. I think you'd agree that the impact on the psyche of the American people as a consequence of the pandemic is profound. Think of how that has changed everything. People's attitudes about themselves, their families, about the state of the nation, about the state of their communities. And so there's a lot of uncertainty out there, a great deal of uncertainty. And we lost 1 million people to COVID. When I got in office, when I got elected, only 2 million people had been vaccinated. I got 220 million. My point is, it takes time. We were left in a very difficult situation. It's been a very difficult time, very difficult.
And a difficult life for the president. In 1972, he lost his wife and daughter in a car accident. He lost his son, Beau, to cancer in 2015 at the age of 46. And his son, Hunter, has been a lightning rod for suspicion. Hunter Biden's former addiction to crack cocaine led to a life he describes as nonstop depravity. He has also acknowledged a federal investigation into his taxes. Congress investigated Hunter Biden's job with a Ukrainian company at the time that his father ran Ukrainian policy in the Obama administration. A Republican investigation, however, uncovered no wrongdoing by then Vice President Biden. Mr. President, if you run again, Republicans are most likely to go after your son, Hunter, once again. And I wonder what you would like to say about your son and whether any of his troubles have caused conflicts for you or for the United States.
I love my son, number one. He fought an addiction problem. He overcame it. He wrote about it. And no, there's not a single thing that I've observed at all that would affect me or the United States relative to my son, Hunter.
Republican investigations are likely to resume if Mr. Biden loses either the House or the Senate. And history shows that presidents usually lose seats in Congress in a midterm election. If so, the president's remaining ambitions may be beyond his reach.
For example, we passed the most extensive gun legislation in 30 years, although I'm not going to rest till we get assault weapons banned, which I did once before when I was a senator.
Assault weapons banned.
Assault weapons banned. There's no rationale. Deer aren't running through the woods wearing Kevlar vests.
Somebody came in and told you about Uvalde when it happened. And I wonder what you thought.
Again, I've gone to every one of those places. And in Uvalde, I spent time with every single 4 hours. 4 hours. And the pain. And it's just so unnecessary. So wrong. Who the hell don't get me going, but I've met with every one of those families and the extended families for 4 hours. Look, our kids should be learning how to read and write, not duck and cover. Think about that. And think of the mental impact on these kids going back to school. You saw it. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's not who we are. But we've got to stop it. We've got to stop it. And the NRA continuing to push the sale of assault and semi-automatic weapons is bizarre.
The much more modest bipartisan gun law that passed this summer may be the best example of the president's legislative breakthroughs that no one thought possible. How'd an old guy do that? He asked us earlier. We have a theory. Joe Biden is among the longest-serving politicians in Washington. If there is less bounce in the step than there once was, if the words don't flow like they used to, maybe there's something to be said for know-how. 5 decades on the Hill and in the Oval. Concerning politics, Mr. President, you were elected to the Senate in 1972. You were 29 years old. And in those days, it seemed that the parties worked together to move the country forward. And I think many Americans feel that that no longer happens and, in fact, may be impossible now.
Well, I don't think it's impossible, but it's changed. What we do today, think about it. It's all personal attacks. It's about motive. It's not about I disagree with you on the subject matter. And secondly, I think that it's fair to say that we've not had a president like the last president who has made all of it so personal. I've had 6 Republican senators, I promised I'd never say their names, and I won't, come up to me in the last 2 years and say, Joe, I agree with you, but if I vote this way, they're gonna primary, I'm gonna lose an election. It didn't used to be that way, but it's coming back a little bit. It's coming back.
Do you see it? It seems to me, Mr. President, that when you first came to the Senate, the other guy had a bad idea. Okay. And now the other guy is a bad guy.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you get back from that.
Well, I tell you what, think about this. We were able to get a bipartisan $1.2 trillion package done for dealing with the whole question of rebuilding the country, the roads and highways. The fact of the matter is we've gotten a lot of things done bipartisanly. When everybody said we're not going to do anything, don't let Biden have any successes, et cetera. So it's still a way to go, but I think we're making some progress.
You have lived a long life of triumph and tragedy. In November, you'll be 80. And I wonder what it is that keeps you in the arena.
Well, look, I've had tragedies. I've lost part of my soul, and I lost my son, Bo, and I lost my wife and my daughter in an accident. I think of all the people who've gone through what I've gone through and a lot more without what I had. I had an incredibly supportive family. There's so many, literally, heroes getting up every day, putting one foot in front of the other with no help. I constantly think, what would Bo want me to do? What would, and you know, this gets me a long way, this rosary.
Catholic and devout, he keeps a rosary in his pocket. And he showed us his other inspiration in a cartoon that his father had framed. In it, the Viking Hagar confronts God after a lightning strike, a blow like those endured by the president.
And he's looking up, and what's he say? He says, why me, God? The next scene, a voice from heaven, why not? That's my dad. Why not, Joey? Why not you? Why not? What makes you so different? Just get up. My mom's expression was, just get up, get up, get up.
And you feel you have more to give?
A lot more to give, a lot more to give.
When we spoke with Joe Biden this past week in Wilmington, Delaware, the former vice president was ahead in the polls, but confronting a withering final assault from President Trump. As the presidential campaign enters its final full week, we also had questions for his running mate, California Senator Kamala Harris. In our conversation, Joe Biden discussed how much he'd be influenced by progressives within his own party, whether his proposed tax increases would hurt the economy, and how he views the current state of the race. With less than 2 weeks to go before Election Day, you have held a steady lead in the national and state polls. But so did Hillary Clinton 4 years ago. Could Donald Trump still win this?
Sure. I'm one of those folks, or competitors, it's not over till the bell rings. And I feel superstitious when I predict anything other than it's going to be a hard fight. We feel good about where we are, but, you know, I don't underestimate how he plays.
What do you mean you don't underestimate how he plays?
Well, you know, there's an awful lot of talk out there about that trying to sort of delegitimize the election. All, I think, designed to make people wonder whether or not they should, whether it's worth going to vote, just the intimidation factor. But what really has pleased me is the overwhelming turnout in the states that have early voting.
Do you think there are a lot of people who are going to vote for you simply because you're not Donald Trump?
Well, I hope there's going to be a lot of people vote for him because of who I am, but I think the contrast between Donald Trump and me is about as stark as it can get. in terms of our value set and how we view the world.
I was listening to one of your podcasts, and you said we need some revolutionary institutional changes. Like what?
Well, for example, I think we have to fundamentally change the way in which we deal with institutional racism. For example, one of the hardest things is beyond police issues. There's the issue of accumulation of wealth. There's an awful lot of black Americans who are equally they're as qualified as white Americans based on the same status they're in terms of their economic opportunity, but they don't get a chance. So, for example, if we just made every corporation pay a minimum 15% tax, you got 91 pay no tax. That raises over $400 billion. I can send every single qualified person to a 4-year college in their state for $150 billion. I can make sure every single person qualifies community college can go, and we still have a lot of money left over. That's what I mean by significant institutional changes.
The Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center and others have questioned whether Joe Biden's corporate minimum tax plan would raise as much money as he estimates. After our interview, Mr. Biden's staff told us he misspoke and that the cost of free public college could be twice as much as he said. The president made the case at the Republican convention that your administration would be a Trojan horse for liberals, that AOC, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren would actually be controlling policy, that this would become the most liberal administration in U.S. history.
He'd love to run against them, wouldn't he? Mr. President, you're running against Joe Biden. Joe Biden has a deep, steep, and successful record over a long, long time.
But Joe Biden's running mate's record is less widely known. Kamala Harris has represented California in the U.S. Senate for almost 4 years. You're very different in the policies that you've supported in the past. You're considered the most liberal United States senator.
Somebody said that, and it actually was Mike Pence on the debate stage, but...
Yeah, well, actually, the nonpartisan GovTrack has rated you as the most liberal senator. You supported the Green New Deal, you supported Medicare for all, you've supported legalizing marijuana. Joe Biden doesn't support those things. So are you going to bring the policies, those progressive policies that you supported as senator, into a Biden administration?
What I will do, and I promise you this, and this is what Joe wants me to do, this was part of our deal. I will always share with him my lived experience as it relates to any issue that we confront. And I promised Joe that I will give him that perspective and always be honest with him.
And is that a socialist or progressive perspective?
No. No, it is the perspective of a woman who grew up a black child in America, who was also a prosecutor, who also has a mother who arrived here at the age of 19 from India, who also, likes hip hop. Like, what do you want to know?
Well, I want to give you the opportunity to address this, because at the Republican National Convention, President Trump made the case that Joe Biden is going to be nothing more than a Trojan horse for socialist policies, for the left wing of the Democratic Party. Are you going to push those policies when you're vice president of the United States?
I am not going to be confined to Donald Trump's definition of who I or anybody else is. And I think America has learned that that would be a mistake.
So just to button that up, because you have fought for Medicare for all. That's not something that Joe Biden supports. If you become vice president, would you say to a President Biden, you know what, we should really be pushing for Medicare for all, not a public option. That's just not going to do it. That's not my value.
I would not have joined the ticket if I didn't support what Joe was proposing. And so our plan includes expanding on everything that Joe, together with President Obama, created with the Affordable Care Act. By contrast, you have Donald Trump, who's in court right now trying to get rid of a policy that brought health care to over 20 million people, including protecting people with pre-existing conditions, and he's doing it in the middle of a pandemic that has killed over 215,000 Americans.
What do you think is the biggest domestic issue America faces?
Right now, the biggest domestic issue is our health. Right now, COVID, the way he's handling COVID is just absolutely, totally irresponsible. He's telling people that we've turned the bend at one of his recent rallies. Well, he's gone, as my grandpa would say, he's gone round the bend. I mean, we are in real trouble.
Mr. Biden says he would spend up to $200 billion to make sure schools have the equipment and staff they need to reopen safely. He also says he'd make greater use of the Defense Production Act to manufacture and distribute millions of testing kits for COVID-19.
We should be investing a great deal more money in testing and tracing. A woman can go in to a drugstore and buy a pregnancy test and find out at home whether or not she's pregnant. We should be doing the same kind of investment to see whether we're going to have testing kits for people to know. It's not enough to know in 7 days or 5 days or 3 days whether or not you have COVID.
But Congress did approve that money for the NIH.
No, that's my point, but it's not there. But they haven't done it. They haven't done it.
People are worried about a national lockdown and worried about jobs. The president's advisor now is Dr. Scott Atlas. And he is advocating young people go about their business and older people sequester.
Nobody thinks he makes any sense. Nobody. No serious doc around the world.
But how do you not lock down the economy?
You don't have to lock down the economy. It depends on the community. It depends on where it's in real trouble. And you have to do things that make sense, that make it easier for people to avoid being exposed. Freedom is about making sure that you care about the people you're around, that they be free too. It's a patriotism to put this mask on.
Let's talk about the economy.
Yes.
You are proposing several $1 trillion in new spending over the next decade for economic relief, education, healthcare. How are you going to pay for that?
By writing the tax code. You got billionaires in this country making $700 billion during this crisis. $700 billion.
He wants to terminate the tax cuts that we gave you.
The former vice president has pledged to undo the Trump tax cuts for corporations and wealthy Americans. He'd raise the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. He'd also raise taxes on people making more than $400,000 a year, and the top rate would be 39.6%.
Nobody making less than $400,000 will pay a penny more in tax under my proposal.
That's a promise.
That's a guarantee, a promise. I give you my word as a Biden. That's an absolute guarantee.
And you think it's a good idea to raise taxes when the economy's in dire straits?
Depending who you're raising them on. Look, if you're raising somebody who's making $1 billion a year, it's not a problem if they pay 39.6%, which everybody should pay, raise another $90 billion.
The president says that's going to end up sending jobs overseas.
He's sending them overseas already. Take a look at what's happened. We now have a trade deficit that's larger with China than when we were there.
Actually, that depends on how you calculate it. The overall trade deficit with China was slightly lower in 2019 than it was during the last 3 years of the Obama administration.
We are making sure
the Biden and Trump campaigns have been engaged in a running battle over who will be tougher on China. Let's turn to foreign policy. What do you think is the biggest foreign threat that America faces?
Our lack of standing in the world. Look what he does. He embraces every dictator in sight, and he pokes his finger in the eye of all of our friends. And so what's happening now is you have the situation in Korea, where they have more lethal missiles and they have more capacity than they had before.
North Korea.
North Korea. You have a situation in the Gulf where you have Iran closer to having enough fissile material to get a nuclear weapon than they had before. You have our NATO allies backing away from us because they say we can't count on us. So he's moving away from what has allowed us to bring the world together.
Which country is the biggest threat to America?
Well, I think the biggest threat to America right now in terms of breaking up our security and our alliances is Russia. Secondly, I think that the biggest competitor is China. And depending on how we handle that will determine whether we're competitors or we end up being in a more serious competition relating to force.
Domestically, Democrats have lost the competition to control the U.S. Supreme Court.
Listen, who is on your list, Joe?
Mr. Biden is under pressure from his own party to consider increasing the number of justices if elected. It's called court packing, and while he's said he's no fan of the idea, he's never completely ruled it out. Judge Amy Coney Barrett is on track to become the 9th U.S. Supreme Court justice. That would give the conservatives a 6-3 majority. If elected, would you move to add more justices to the Supreme Court?
If elected, what I will do is I'll put together a national commission bipartisan commission of scholars, constitutional scholars, Democrats, Republicans, liberal, conservative. And I will ask them to, over 180 days, come back to me with recommendations as to how to reform the court system, because it's getting out of whack, the way in which it's being handled. And it's not about court packing. There's a number of other things that our constitutional scholars have debated, and I'd look to see what recommendations that commission might make.
This is a live ball.
Oh, it is a live ball. No, it is a live ball. We're going to have to do that. And you're going to find there's a lot of conservative constitutional scholars who are saying it as well. The last thing we need to do is turn the Supreme Court into just a political football. Whoever has the most votes gets whatever they want. Presidents come and go. Supreme Court justices stay for generations. I have not taken a penny from any foreign source ever in my life.
In the closing days of the campaign, Joe Biden has been forced to address new and unverified claims that he was involved in his son Hunter's foreign business dealings. The president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, says he came into possession of emails allegedly belonging to Hunter Biden and turned them over to the tabloid New York Post.
Smoking gun emails.
Mr. Trump and his allies have called for an investigation, but the FBI would neither confirm nor deny to 60 Minutes that one was taking place. Do you believe the recent leak of material allegedly from Hunter's computer is part of a Russian disinformation campaign?
From what I've read and know, the intelligence community warned the president that Giuliani was being fed disinformation from the Russians. And we also know that Putin is trying very hard to spread disinformation about Joe Biden. And so when you put the combination of Russia, Giuliani, the president together, it's just what it is. It's a smear campaign because he has nothing he wants to talk about. What is he running on? What is he running on?
We'll ask Joe Biden about his age and mental sharpness and ask Senator Harris what her role would be in a Biden White House when we come back. On the campaign trail, President Donald Trump paints former Vice President Joe Biden as an aging career politician and questions his mental acuity. This past Monday in our conversation, Mr. Biden frankly discussed his age, his health, and why he believes Kamala Harris stands ready to become president if necessary. If elected, you would be the oldest president in American history.
But I'm in good shape.
78 years old, 82 after 4 years. Donald Trump says you have dementia and it's getting worse.
Hey, the same guy who thought that the 9/11 attack was a 7/11 attack, he's talking about dementia? All I can say to the American people is watch me. You see what I've done. You see what I'm going to do. Look at me. Compare our physical and mental acuity. I'm happy to have that comparison.
Your age makes the choice of your vice president all the more important. Why do you think Senator Harris would be ready to step in and become commander-in-chief if something were to happen to you?
Number one, her values. Number two, she is smart as a devil. Number three, she has a backbone like a ramrod. Number four, she is really principled. And number five, she has had significant experience in the largest state in the union, running the Justice Department. It's only second in size to the United States Justice Department. And, obviously, I hope that never becomes a question.
Kamala Harris was the first woman and first black person to be District Attorney of San Francisco and Attorney General of California. And she's only the second black woman to serve in the United States Senate. Do you think having the first woman of color, the first woman as vice president, may change things?
I do. It helps change the perception of who can do what. Because that is still part of the battle, after all. And you imagine some young person then seeing, oh, things can be different. I don't have to conform to whatever I'm, supposed to do or relegated to do. I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been,
What kind of role do you think you would play in a Biden administration?
Joe Biden's partner. One of the first things he said was, I want you to be the first person in the room and the last person in the room.
How often do you and Joe Biden speak?
Almost every day.
Your next Vice President of the United States, Kamala
Harris.
From the moment Joe Biden selected her as his running mate, Senator Harris has become one of President Trump's favorite targets.
And she's not competent. She's not competent.
On the campaign trail, President Trump has attacked you frequently. He's called you a monster. He said you're nasty and it would be an insult to our country if you became the first female president. Do you see this as just the rough and tumble of politics, or do you view those attacks against you as racist?
Well, this is not the first time in my life I've been called names. And it was predictable, sadly.
Do you think the president is racist?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do. You can look at a pattern that goes back to him questioning the identity of the first black president of the United States. You can look at Charlottesville, when there were peaceful protesters, and on the other side, neo-Nazis, and he talks about fine people on either side, calling Mexicans rapists and criminals. His first order of business was to institute a Muslim ban. It all speaks for itself.
President Trump has said he denounces racism and white supremacy after the Black Lives Matter protests that began this summer.
Joe Biden has surrendered his party to the flag burners, rioters.
The president tried to frame the election as a choice between law and order and Biden and Harris. There's a sense that there's a divide out there, that in order to address systemic racism, that it's anti-police, that you would not be a law and order president.
Well, let me put it this way. Number one, I've never, ever supported defunding police. Matter of fact, I think we should give more funding to police for different reasons. Number two, any use of violence, burning down stores, smashing windows, that is a crime. People should be arrested. No justification for it. There's never been a conflict with me between law and order and dignity. They're one and the same.
The president said on the stump, "I've saved the suburbs. You should thank me."
He wouldn't know a suburb unless he took a wrong turn. Go out in the suburbs now. It's not 1950. There are black and white families living next door to one another, driving each other's kids to soccer practice. This is a different world than he lives in. Look, there's a lot of reasons people are upset, a lot of good reasons. All he wants to do is take that sort of subliminal fear out there and say, it's because of that guy or because of that woman. That's not who we are as a country. I mean, this is not who we are. It's not our value system. You know, we hold these truths to be self-evident. We've never met it. We've never met the standard, but we've always gone further and further and further toward inclusion. This is the first president who's trying to shut it down. We cannot sustain this democracy that way. We're so much better than this.
Joe Biden spent 8 years as vice president under Barack Obama and 36 years in the U.S. Senate. He has been leading the Democratic field for the 2020 presidential nomination, but the race is tightening. Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have energized the young, progressive wing of the party and argue that Biden's policy proposals don't go far enough. But his most powerful and vocal opponent is the President of the United States, who is facing an impeachment inquiry over whether he pressured the Ukrainian government to dig up dirt on Biden and his son Hunter. We talked with Joe Biden at his home in Delaware earlier this week, where we covered a wide variety of topics, including why Democrats should be excited about voting for a candidate who is about to turn 77 years old. The Democratic Party has had Jack Kennedy, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. This is your third run for president. Why Joe Biden?
Well, because I think, as I said, we need somebody who on day one knows exactly what to do, can command the world stage. No one wonders whether I know a great deal about these issues in foreign policy and domestic policy. They're things I've done.
And that might be one of the criticisms, too, that you're offering essentially 4 more years of a Obama-like administration.
Well, let me tell you something. I love the fact that all of a sudden the Democratic Party doesn't think Obama was that great a president. I find that fascinating.
Some have asked, why hasn't President Obama endorsed you? You guys served together for 8 years.
Because I want to earn this on my own.
Did he offer to endorse you?
No, we didn't even get there. I asked him not to. He said, okay. I think it's better. I think he thinks it's better for me. I have no doubt when I'm the nominee, he'll be out in the campaign trail for me. I'm not going to change who I am.
Today marks 99 days until the Iowa caucuses, the first Democratic contest. Despite his strength in the polls, Joe Biden tends not to draw a lot of young people to his campaign events, a problem some of his competitors don't have. Your opponents, because they're promising so much change, they seem to be igniting the Democratic base that turns out in the primary, younger voters.
The fact of the matter is that if you take a look at who votes in these primaries, overwhelmingly people over the age of 50 who vote in these primaries. I want more young people engaged. I want them voting. But the idea that this is the way in which it's going to change is by just making the most far-reaching assertions you can make. I mean, let's talk about Medicare for all. Do you think there's been any truth in advertising on that? It's going to raise taxes on middle-class people, not just wealthy people.
You're talking about Elizabeth Warren.
Well, I'm not only talking about, even Bernie acknowledges you got to raise taxes.
Elizabeth Warren says she's going to propose a wealth tax. 2 cents on the dollar for every dollar over $50 million. She says that money can be used to improve teacher salaries, provide tuition-free public college, and wipe out student debt.
I don't oppose wealth tax. I propose changing the whole tax system. The tax I will put on the wealthy will, in fact, cost more than 2% because they're not going to be able to take a capital gain. They're going to pay at 40% like everybody else, 39.8%.
You've said you would repeal all of Trump's tax cuts. But do you mean just for the wealthy or for the middle class too? Because Trump did give the middle class a tax cut.
Well, Trump gave a middle-class tax cut that was negligible. The fact is that what we should be doing is making sure that the wealthy pay their fair share.
So making over how much per year? What's wealthy?
Making over $400,000 a year, those tax cuts will be repealed, and people making between $250,000 and $400,000, their tax rate would increase. But here's the deal. What the middle class people really care about is, can they afford education? Can they afford their health care? I would take the money and I'd pay for the health care proposal I put forward. I'd pay for education. So there's a whole range of things that go directly to affect middle class people.
We should be ashamed about that.
The skirmishes within the Democratic Party have been overshadowed recently by questions of foreign interference in the upcoming election. This past Monday, Facebook announced it removed fake Russian accounts on social media that attacked Joe Biden. The news broke the day before we spoke with Biden and his wife, Jill, who joined us for part of our interview. The Russians are targeting you.
The Russians don't want me to be president, and Trump doesn't want me to be the nominee. There's certain things that have come across very, very clearly.
I mean, how concerned are you about foreign interference in this election?
I'm very concerned about foreign interference, beyond me. Everybody knows what's going on. Trump not only doesn't want to do anything about it, he's going out and asking for help. Come help me. Come help me keep Biden from being the nominee.
Perpetuating.
I mean,
how is he perpetuating it?
Well, by encouraging them to, to get involved in our elections.
But President Trump says Russian interference is a hoax.
He's an idiot in terms of saying that. Everybody knows this. Everybody knows it. Nobody doubts it.
While Facebook removed the fake Russian accounts,
fact,
it refused a request by Biden's campaign to take down political ads paid for by the Trump campaign, making claims that Biden says are not true.
Joe Biden promised Ukraine $1 billion if they fired the prosecutor investigating his son's company.
Facebook is running right now paid advertising by Trump that everybody knows is a flat lie. I'm glad they brought the Russians down. Why not you bring down the lies that Trump is telling, and everybody knows are lies?
Are you concerned that the president saying this over and over again, his campaign ads saying over and over again, that people will start to believe it? He's attacking your integrity.
Sure he is, but it's coming from a man with no integrity, so it helps. No, I sincerely mean it. I never thought I'd talk about a president this way.
Yeah.
In a statement to 60 Minutes, a White House spokesperson said President Trump takes election security seriously and has delivered both offensive sanctions and defensive hardening of our election security.
Joe Biden and his son walking
And the president continues to argue there should be an investigation into Hunter Biden's work for Ukrainian gas company called Burisma during the time his father was vice president and overseeing U.S. policy in Ukraine. Hunter Biden was reportedly paid $50,000 to $80,000 a month for several years while serving on Burisma's board. Hunter said the only thing you said to him was, quote, "I hope you know what you're doing."
That's exactly right. He's a grown man. What I meant by that is, I hope you've thought this through. I hope you know exactly what you're doing here.
Meaning what?
That's all I meant. Nothing more than that, because I've never discussed my business or their business, my sons or daughters, and I've never discussed them because they know where I have to do my job and that's it, and they have to make their own judgments.
Do you understand people say, Joe Biden, he's an experienced politician, statesman, knows the issues of Ukraine. Why didn't he just say to his son, this is one to take a pass on, it may not look good?
He was already on the board, and he's a grown man. And it turns out he did not do a single thing wrong, as everybody's investigated.
President Trump has said publicly, Joe Biden and his son are stone cold corrupt. And chances are he's watching this interview. Anything you want to say to him?
Yeah, Mr. President, release your tax returns. Let's see how straight you are, okay, old buddy? I put out 21 years of mine. So show us your tax returns, bud. Well, what are you hiding? You want to deal with corruption? Start to act like it. Release your tax returns or shut up.
The general election is more than a year away.
And Hunter, who's not too smart.
But on the campaign trail, you wouldn't know it listening to President Trump and his son Eric attack Hunter Biden at rallies, where crowds chant, "Lock him up." Are you sorry you dragged your family into this?
No, I didn't. I'm not sorry. Look,
We didn't drag them into
and
it.
by the way,
They came to us. You know, you have to run. They knew it was going to be rough.
Do you believe President Trump's children have acted properly and avoided conflicts of interest?
I wasn't raised to go after the children. Their actions speak for themselves. I can just tell you this, that if I'm president, get elected president, my children are not going to have offices in the White House. My children are not going to sit in on cabinet meetings.
What's improper about that?
It's just simply improper because you should make it clear to the American public that everything you're doing is for them. For them. And the idea that you're going to have his children, his son-in-law, et cetera, engaged in the day-to-day operation of things they know nothing about. Just think
You don't think Jared Kushner should be negotiating a Middle East peace solution?
No, I don't. I don't. What credential does he bring to that?
Former Vice President Joe Biden.
Let's talk about the state of the race, because it has tightened. Do you still consider yourself the front runner?
I know I'm the front runner. Find me a national poll with a couple exceptions. But look, this is a marathon.
Yes.
This is a marathon.
You can look at the last campaign finance filing. We looked at that. You have less than $9 million in the bank. Bernie Sanders has nearly $34 million in the bank. Senator Warren has $26 million. How do you compete against that?
I just flat beat them. We're on course to do extremely well. I'm not worried about being able to fund this campaign. I really am not, truly.
Since our interview, Biden has dropped his opposition to the formation of a super PAC, an independent political action committee that can raise unlimited sums from corporations, unions, and big donors, something his two main rivals, Warren and Sanders, have pledged not to do.
If you really want to get it done,
How would you rate your performance in the debates?
a learning curve. By that I mean they're not debates. They're 1-minute assertions. When someone says, you've done something awful that's not true, respond in 30 seconds, it's awful hard to do.
But you've made a number of gaffes in the debates. In the October debate, you confused Syria with Iraq. In the September debate, you conflated Iraq and Afghanistan. When you're watching these debates, do you worry about the gaffes?
No, I don't worry about the gaffes. And you know what? The American people know who Joe Biden is. I mean, if he misspeaks one word, that doesn't affect the way they're going to vote one way or the other.
Some Democrats worry and wonder whether you'll be fast enough on your feet, quick enough to defend yourself against President Trump.
Well, what they're really trying to make the case is about age. And with age comes experience, with experience comes wisdom, and with wisdom comes judgment.
You know he calls you Sleepy Joe.
I know that.
You will be 77 in November. Is that too old to be president?
No. I just say to them, watch me. Just watch.
Have you seen any change in his ability to communicate in recent years?
No, not at all.
The economy is booming. Our people are prospering.
The unemployment rate in September was 3.5%, the lowest it's been in half a century. And if the economy remains strong next year, President Trump will not miss an opportunity to remind voters of that fact, nor a chance to bash those seeking to impeach him.
They know they can't win on election day, so they're pursuing an illegal, invalid, and unconstitutional bullshit impeachment.
I think he thinks that if you say the big lie enough, you keep repeating it, people will believe it. But this time, it's different.
You were in the Senate for 36 years. You know a lot of these Republican senators well. What would it take for 20 or more Republican senators to vote to remove the president from office?
For the people in their district to say, in their state to say, enough, we're holding you responsible.
About this election, if it doesn't work out, would you be okay with that? Could you walk away and say, I didn't win, but my legacy is intact?
I'm not worried about my legacy. What I am worried about is the country. 4 years of Donald Trump will be very hard to overcome, but we can. 8 years of Donald Trump will fundamentally change the nature of who we are as a country. It'll take a generation or more, for us to get back on track.
On Wednesday, Vice President Joe Biden stepped back from the 2016 presidential campaign. Standing in the White House Rose Garden, flanked by his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, and President Obama, the vice president seemed reluctant, even regretful, as he passed up a third try for the presidency.
Unfortunately, I believe we're out of time, the time necessary to mount a winning campaign for the nomination. But while I will not be a candidate, I will not be silent.
And he certainly wasn't Saturday afternoon when we joined the vice president and Dr. Biden at their official residence on the grounds of the Naval Observatory for his first television interview since the announcement. It's been a big week. How are you feeling about this decision?
Good. It's the right decision for the family. It's the right decision for us.
Is it that you think you couldn't win, or that you didn't want to run?
Couldn't win. I'll be very blunt. If I thought we could have put together the campaign that our supporters deserved and our contributors deserved, I would have gone ahead and done it.
But why did it take you to Tuesday to figure that out, to
Because
Tuesday night?
it took that long for us to decide as a family. Look, dealing with the loss of Beau, any parent listening who's lost a child knows that you can't, it doesn't follow schedules of primaries and caucuses and contributors and the like. It just, and everybody grieves at a different pace.
And we had such hope that, that he was going to live. And so I think it really wasn't until the day he died that we I don't think we ever gave up hope.
The Bidens lost their son, Beau, in May at age 46 to brain cancer. The vice president told us that during his illness and while grieving, he put his plans to run for president on hold. What was the single most important thing in deciding not to run?
I've said from the beginning that I don't know whether our ability to deal with the loss of Beau would reach a point where we could do that before time ran out. And there was nothing we could control.
Were you disappointed or were you relieved?
No, I think I was disappointed. I mean, I thought Joe would be a great president. And, I've seen in the 40 years we've been together, I've seen, the strength of his character, his optimism, his hope.
I'm glad we're doing this interview. I'd like to hear Jill say all that.
So I believed he would have been the best president.
I mean, how much did you struggle with this, about whether to run or not?
What I struggled with
was whether or not we could emotionally, I could, speak for me, I could emotionally handle this in a way that when I thought of Bo, it wasn't a problem. For example, at one point, late summer, I thought, well, I think we can do this. And I'll never forget, my little granddaughter, we're down by the swimming pool. Mom says, time for dinner, everybody. And everybody goes up, and she's lying between my legs, their head on my shoulder, my chest, and turns around and puts her arms around me and starts sobbing. She says, Pop, I see Daddy all the time. I see Daddy all the time. Pop, you smell like Daddy. You're not going to leave me, are you, Pop? Well, when that happens, you go, I don't know, man. How can... And so there are those kinds of ups and downs. But by the time now, we were home last weekend, and every weekend we can get, and we went to her. She's a great little cross country. Yeah. She's only 11 years old. Track meet. And she runs and she finishes, and I give her a big hug. She said, Daddy would be happy, wouldn't he? Wouldn't he? Yeah. So it's a total, it just takes time, and until you get there, it's not an appropriate thing to throw your. And by the way, you can't run for president unless you throw your entire being into it.
How often did the two of you talk about this decision? Every night?
Well, we just looked at each other half the time. Like I'd get up in the morning, some mornings, and I'd say, Jill, I think because I have to admit to you, what's driving us crazy is you guys. We love you, but serious press people would say, well, we have on good authority from a very close friend of Joe Biden's that he's going to announce tomorrow, or we have on good authority that he's not going to run, and that used to drive me crazy. And so part of it was I'd get up some mornings and say, let's just end this thing, man. We don't have time I don't want to keep getting buffeted like this. And so some mornings we'd say, like I remember about a month ago, we're on the porch at home, and I said, maybe we should just, I don't know if we're going to get there in time. Maybe we should just say we're not going. And Jill said, but what about the Supreme Court?
What about education? What about community colleges? I felt like everything we had worked so hard for in this administration, could just all change.
Now that's because she's prejudiced. She thinks that I have the best chance of winning a general election. So that's.
But that's really interesting to hear that you were really pushing him to go forward.
Oh yeah, sure.
Will you ever run for political office again?
No. I can do so much more. I believe, I hope I leave office as a respected figure who can convene people and bring people together. And I just think the president and I talked about what we do together, what we each want to do out of office.
You said something in the Rose Garden. You said, if I could be anything, I would want to be the president that ended cancer.
It's true. It's personal. I acknowledge, but cancer affects every single family. And one of the great advantages and advantage I had is being vice president. I had access to the finest people in the world. And I am confident if we make the decision John Kennedy made of going to the moon, and we said we are going to cure cancer, within the next several years, we can do that. That's how close it is.
After we interviewed the Bidens together, Jill Biden stepped out, and we continued our conversation with the vice president.
Believe me, I'm sure she's happy to.
Thank you. There was a lot you had to weigh in this run for president. I know you talked to your son, Bo, about running for president. What did he want you to do?
The first thing I'd like to do, and you're being very polite the way you're asking me the question, because some people have written that, Bo on his deathbed said, Dad, you've got to run. And there was this sort of Hollywood moment that, nothing like that ever happened. Bo, from the time he was in his 30s, or actually his late 20s, he and Hunter, my two most reliable advisors. And Bo all along thought that I should run and I could win. But there was not what is sort of made out as kind of this Hollywood-esque thing that at the last minute, Bo grabbed my hand and said, Dad, you've got to run, like win one for the Gipper. It wasn't anything like that.
I want to show you a photo of President Obama and you. This is in the Oval Office. This is right before you went out to the Rose Garden and told everybody that you weren't running for president. What advice did the president give you?
Well, I called the president early in the morning. He was in the gym working out. And he took my call, and I said, Mr. President, I said, we've decided. I'm not going to run. And he knew how close it was, what was going on. And I said, I'm going to go out and announce it this morning or early afternoon. He said, Joe, I'd be proud to stand with you.
But did the president want you to run?
The president wanted me to do what I thought was best.
But that speech in the Rose Garden sounded a little bit like a campaign platform. Did you have a speech written for whether you were going to run or whether you weren't going to run? Because part of the speech sounded like, I'll be ready, I've got a plan if you need me at some point.
Well, the truth is, there's some truth to that because what I wanted to make clear.
But are you leaving the door open if something happens?
No. I was making the case that I do want to influence the Democratic Party. I want to make no bones about that. I don't want the party walking away from what Barack and I did.
You said, I will not be silent.
I will not be silent. And I went on, and in fact, say, and I want, to the extent I can, influence the direction of the Democratic Party and the country.
Well, let me ask you about that, because you didn't mention Hillary Clinton at all during your speech, but you sure did seem to be referring to her. You said, I don't think we should look at Republicans as our enemies. Was that a reference to the comment she made?
That wasn't directed to Hillary. That was a reference to Washington, all of Washington.
But she called Republicans enemies in the debate.
Well, I think she was being more humorous than she was direct about that.
But she said that in the debate. She was asked, which enemy are you most proud of? And she said the Iranians, and then she also mentioned the Republicans.
Well, she was smiling when she said the Republicans, and I don't take it that that's her view. But I do know it's the view of many people. Like, for example, when I made this statement, there were two big articles read and said, well, why is Biden so naive? These people are our enemy. From serious people. They're not my enemy. How in God's name can we govern this country if we view the opposition as an enemy?
Did you watch the Democratic debate? Did you watch Hillary Clinton? Did you think she's unbeatable?
No, I didn't think that. What I thought was she did a great job. And I thought Bernie did a great job. Look, I've debated Hillary 13 times in national presidential debates. I know Hillary. I know her debating skills. I know mine. I have never had any doubt about her intellect or her capacity to debate, and I thought she comported herself really well.
But you wouldn't have considered running for president unless you thought or had some doubts about Hillary Clinton.
Not at all. That has nothing to do with it. I've said from the beginning, look, I like Hillary. Hillary and I get along together. The only reason to run is because I still think I could do a better job than anybody else could do. That's the reason to run. I wouldn't run against Hillary.
But you also said in the Rose Garden that Democrats should run on the record.
That's right.
The president's record.
I believe that.
Do you think Hillary's running on that or something else?
Well, she'll run on part of it or not. She's already made a decision on two important things. It doesn't mean she won't be a great president.
So when the New York Times reported this past week that there's real tension between you and Hillary Clinton, that the mere mention of her name makes you fume, according to some advisors.
Well, let me tell you something. This must be the same guys who knew I was going to run, because that's never been the case. Go back and find anybody who says for the 4 years we worked together, Hillary and I weren't friends.
What do you think of Donald Trump?
The one thing I'm disappointed in Donald Trump. I know what a showman and all that he is, but I really don't think it's healthy, and I hope he reconsiders this sort of attack on all immigrants. I think that is beneath the country. I don't think it's where the American people are, and I hope he really doesn't believe it.
You have 15 months left in office.
I do.
What one or two things do you think you can get done?
Well, I think we can get a number of things done. One, I think we can really begin to nail down this commitment to work on cancer and head toward a moonshot. The president and I have already talked about that. Number two, I think we can make some real progress, particularly with Paul Ryan, who is a good guy, on working toward an accommodation on the budget and on keeping the government open.
This White House has not been able to get much done with this Congress. Do you think
That's true.
Speaker Ryan will change things?
Yes. This is a decent guy. And he knows you cannot function. This government can't function without reaching some consensus, and he wants to do that.
I know you often give advice to people, and one of the things you say is you're either on your way up or you're on your way down. Which one are you?
I think I'm still moving up. I think we got a lot to do.
The first 100 days of an administration is when the first report cards come out. The president is facing a barrage of tough issues, and he's getting some good marks and some criticism. But what about the vice president? Well, he's still regular Joe, a man deepened by tragedy when his first wife and baby daughter were killed in a car crash in 1972. A senator for 36 years, chairman of 2 powerful committees, he told us he may have more experience than any vice president ever. And yet he has a reputation as a gaffe machine, a loose cannon who simply talks too much. I asked him if he was worried about doing an interview for 60 Minutes. "It's not you I'm afraid of," he said. "It's me." But everyone we spoke to at the White House said they don't want him to change.
The president and the entire team close to him has encouraged me not to try to all of a sudden be a different Joe Biden than I was for the past 36 years. Sometimes maybe I shouldn't be as straightforward as I am, but I'm not going to change that.
So
I've
you're
decided,
not sitting on it?
I'm not sitting on it. I am who I am.
After trying to muzzle the man, often ridiculed for his loose lips, the White House now calls his, shall we say, exuberance an asset. They call it truth-telling and see his talent for connecting as a real advantage.
Good to see you, buddy. Good to see you, pal.
Let Joe be Joe, with his attaboying, hand-gripping, hot personality versus Obama's cool cat. You seem to be not just yin and yang, but diametric opposites. He's so disciplined. This is not you. He's crisp. This is not you.
There's a lot of constituencies out there that want the time, want to hear more than the, as you would say, the crisp answer. They want somebody who's going to take the time and have the time to listen to them.
And that's you.
That's basically my job, and I like engaging with people.
You only have to stand for president.
Call him schmoozer-in-chief. And as he told his audience in St. Louis, he loves being vice president.
When I was United States Senator and a powerful chairman, I'd have to plead. Now I can just call a cabinet meeting. They all show up. You know what I mean?
But at the end of the day, he is number 2. And the question of how he's dealing with the transition from powerful senator to the guy standing behind the much younger president has become a Washington parlor question. He admitted to me that after 36 years being his own boss, the first 100 days have been a period of adjustment. When you say that you, your own man kind of thing versus working basically for someone else.
Yeah.
So what?
Well, it's like, for example, I would ordinarily have picked up the phone and called the captain of that ship as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee.
Right.
Well, it's not appropriate for me to do that. I mean, the president did it right away. You follow me?
Yes,
so
yes,
it's
of course.
You know, little things. They're really not big things, but little things. It's not quite as big as my Senate office, but it was.
Your Senate office was bigger? Is that true?
Yeah, it is true.
He hasn't had much time to worry about the little things because there have been so many big things, from Afghanistan to bailouts to torture memos, which means, he told me, he's been spending a lot of time with the president. You wanted to be, I've heard the expression, Uber advisor. You wanted to be involved in all the issues and be the last person in the room when he makes a decision.
Well, the first part is too sophisticated a term for me. But,
but has it worked out?
Yes, it has worked out. On every major decision, the president has actually sought my advice.
Joe Biden's doing an outstanding job.
The president wants everyone to know, his team and us, in case there's any question, that he thinks he made a brilliant choice.
He's pretty fearless in offering his opinions. He's oftentimes willing to make the contrarian argument and really forces people to think and defend their positions. And that ends up being very valuable for me.
Does he argue with you?
You know, Joe's not afraid to tell me what he thinks. Then that's exactly what I need and exactly what I want.
And that's why I've asked Vice President Biden to lead a tough, unprecedented oversight effort, because nobody messes with Joe.
With so much on his plate, the president has made his number two the stimulus cop.
Am I right? They don't mess with him.
The assignment? To see that the $787 billion in stimulus money is spent wisely.
You cannot take that money and, put it in a rainy day fund or whatever.
He's on the phone several hours a week with mayors and governors, making sure they follow the rules.
But don't come back and tell me you build a swimming pool because it doesn't pass the smell test.
It does seem like the administration is saying we can do it all. The spending, not have taxes, all of that. Maybe you're not completely leveling with us, that your assumptions are too rosy. This was just what the administration was not supposed to be doing.
What we have done is we have taken what are the consensus estimates on the low side of what we think is going to happen.
But I keep hearing that we're going to have really high unemployment till the end of 2010.
Look, it took us a long time to get into this. And it's going to take us a while to get out. That's why we're investing the money we're investing in this recovery package. Had we not done that, things would be a great deal worse.
Is this the right time to fix all of that? Or is the economy in such bad shape that the deficits are going to get out of hand in the future? Well, that's the fear. There is a fear.
It's a legitimate fear. There's only one way to keep it from happening. Reduce our energy cost and reduce our health care cost.
The only question is when. That's the only question.
Now.
All his expertise doesn't mean the White House rests easy when the vice president is holding forth. His penchant for bloopers still makes them nervous. The president himself once called them Joe's rhetorical flourishes, like this one.
If we do everything right, if we do it with absolute certainty, there's still a 30% chance we're going to get it wrong.
The gaffes. He's actually shown some displeasure with you in public.
That's true. That had happened in the past. And quite frankly, the president said to me he was sorry that it was taken out of context, his body language on one of those cases.
His body language when Mr. Biden made fun of the Chief Justice's flubbing at the inaugural swearing-in of the president.
My memory is not as good as Justice Roberts.
The president moves in with a disapproving tap and a tight-lipped grimace. Do you talk it out, take him to the woodshed, or are you candid enough with each other?
We are, actually. And if Joe was off message on a particular day, usually I don't have to bring it up. He's the first one to come to me and say, you know what, I'm not sure that's exactly how we want to position ourselves. The flip side is if I'm off message, he's not going to be bashful about saying, Mr. President, I think,
really?
We might want to steer more in that direction.
Does it make me susceptible to being a target? Yeah, it does.
A little bit of lampooning kind of stuff?
Much of the ridicule of me is well-deserved.
The vice president gets especially high marks as a team player. For those who predicted he and the Secretary of State would be rivals, they both say, And in fact, they meet for a policy breakfast every Tuesday.
He has been at the highest levels of American foreign policy decision-making, and we all listen to him.
Mr. Biden prides himself in knowing how the world works. So what about the criticism that the president's been too chummy with some of our adversaries? The Republicans are hammering away on this handshake that the president had with Hugo Chavez, and whether it conveyed some kind of lack of toughness on his part.
Do you think Hugo Chavez or anyone else in the world thinks that Barack Obama shaking hands with a man who's invited to a conference with him, who's president of another country, who walks up to him and shakes his hand, do you think they think that's weakness? I think it expresses confidence.
And then there's something else that's bubbling, and this is a direct quote from Dick Cheney, saying that he finds it disturbing that Mr. Obama apologizes all the time. Our enemies will be quick to take advantage of a situation if they think they're dealing with, quote, a weak president.
Look, I don't know what he's apologized for. For example, saying we should close Guantanamo is not an apology. It's a reflection of a fact that the policy that we engaged in made us weaker in the world. He didn't go out and say, oh, my God, the fact that the last administration did these things, we're so sorry. He didn't say, he just said, we don't do torture anymore.
Would you mind taking a picture of us?
We joined him on a trip to Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri last week. Mr. Biden feels a special bond with military audiences. His own son, Beau, a captain in the Army National Guard, was sent to Iraq in November when his unit was called up. Flying back to Washington on Air Force 2, I asked him if he worries about his son's safety.
I've ridden home with too many dead young men and women in caskets. And it's just impossible to not associate with that. I mean, you think as a parent, God forbid, how would I respond?
But do you ever say, my God, my own son is there?
Well, you know, I don't know how to answer that. The way I deal with it is I don't think about it that way. I'm proud of him. He's a good man.
He still calls both his sons, Hunter 39 and Beau, now 40, honey.
Actually, I do. I do.
How do they feel about it?
Well, I think they feel good about it. When we see each other, we hug and kiss. But after my wife and daughter were killed, I don't know quite what happened, but I found myself being maybe more physically embracive of my little boys.
He's physically embracive with everybody. Total strangers. He hugs, he slaps, he punches, grabs, holds, noses in, and bumps foreheads. Children are a special magnet. He and his wife Jill work them like a rope line of voters on a campaign. And he cannot resist speechifying, even when his audience is made up of 6-year-olds.
Let me tell you something. A couple of you asked me a question. What inspired you to want to be the vice president? And what inspired me to be vice president was a guy some of you know, Barack Obama. I actually tried to be president, but you know what? He's better than I was. The Bidens have been married for 31 years. In addition to the 2 sons, they have a daughter, Ashley. They've lived a modest life in Delaware. Mrs. Biden, a professor of English, still teaches at a community college. You come home and grade papers at night?
Every night.
She carries the papers everywhere.
I'm no different than most American women who are raising children and working.
They both seem to be getting a kick out of living in a big mansion now. Joe Biden was always one of the poorest senators. They always said that every time the tax returns came out. Joe Biden, one of the poorest.
Now he's the poorest vice president.
The vice president likes to talk about his working class roots as he goes around the country telling average Americans how all the stimulus money is going to help them.
We have $500 million in this to train people for green jobs.
I could hear the ka-ching, ka-ching, the cost of all this.
What's happened here is we inherited a yearly debt of $1.2 trillion. We're going to cut that debt we inherited in half within the first 4 years.
Oh, come on.
No, we are.
With all the spending?
With all the spending.
And no taxes on any part of the middle class?
No additional taxes. The tax cuts for the middle class.
You're rosy.
I think I'm realistic.
So is the vice president really unleashed? There's a sense he's trying to find a balance between watching his tongue, he hasn't made a gaffe since early February, and just being Joe.
Labor Day weekend has always been considered the unofficial beginning of a presidential campaign. And while this one has been going on for a year and a half, both parties finalized their tickets this past week. With the kids going back to school and parents back to work, the nation is focused on what many people believe is one of the most important U.S. elections ever. Tonight we're covering the Democrats, who concluded an historic convention in Denver by making Senator Barack Obama of Illinois the first African-American ever nominated for president by a major party. We have the first joint interview with the candidate and his running mate, Senator Joe Biden of Delaware.
Hello, Democrats!
Senator Obama went into the Democratic convention locked in a dead heat with Republican rival John McCain and needed to do 3 things: introduce his running mate Joe Biden to the country, draw sharp distinctions between himself and his Republican opponent,
I move.
and unify a Democratic Party badly split by a bruising primary campaign against Hillary Clinton. By most accounts, he accomplished all three.
I accept your nomination.
He attracted 84,000 people to Invesco Field in Denver, and another 40 million to their television sets all across America.
And now is the time.
More Americans saw the speech than watched the opening ceremony of the Olympics. We began our conversations with the new Democratic candidates backstage.
How are you? So nice to see you.
Just moments after the most improbable nominee had given the most important speech of his young career.
Did you ever doubt it was going to happen?
Of course.
When?
Well, let's see. About a year ago, we were down 30 in Iowa. You know, but I never doubted that it could happen. I never doubted that if we were able to mobilize the energy that you saw in that stadium all across the country.
I knew it was going to happen before he did. I was running like the devil. I watched. I thought I was pretty good, but I watched. This guy just sort of grabbed the lightning. You know, it just grabbed it. And you could tell, Barack, I tell you, my team knew. I knew in August. I knew what it was.
We were doing okay.
I knew it was.
So, but this is exciting. So,
were you surprised to be up here?
I was surprised. I'm truly honored to be up here. I'm a great admirer. We're friends, and we fit.
Steve, good to see you.
By the time we continued the conversation with them the next day in Pittsburgh, the landscape had already changed.
Some of life's greatest opportunities come unexpectedly.
Senator McCain tried to steal the Democrats' thunder by announcing that Alaska's conservative first-term governor, 44-year-old Sarah Palin, would be his running mate, a move widely seen as an attempt to try and siphon disaffected supporters of Senator Clinton and blue-collar voters in battleground states where Obama has been the weakest. A few hours after the announcement, Senators Obama and Biden seemed as surprised as everyone else.
What do you think of Senator McCain's vice presidential choice?
She seems to have a compelling life story. Obviously, she's a fine mother and a up-and-coming public servant. My sense is that she subscribes to John McCain's agenda.
Does the fact that he chose as his vice president someone who has less experience than you take that weapon out of his arsenal?
Well, I think that's a good question to address to Senator McCain. Of course, the issue of experience is going to be relevant. And if I were running against me, that's something that I would try to make an issue of as well, particularly if I had been in Washington as long as John McCain had.
She's a lifelong member of the NRA. She's a hunter. Her husband's a member of the United Steelworker Union, blue-collar guy, got a son on the way to Iraq. It seems like just the kind of person who would appeal the voters in states that you absolutely have to win.
Well, I think...
And they have to win.
Well, look, I am happy if this ends up being a referendum on what's going to be good for blue-collar workers. I'll put my guy, Joe Biden, up against anybody when it comes to fighting on behalf of those families, because he's been there. He comes out of Scranton, Pennsylvania. He's been fighting for those folks ever since he got into the Senate, and he hasn't stopped, and he hasn't forgotten where he's come from.
You know, I think we really underestimate the people in the neighborhoods I came from, you came from. I really think we underestimate them. People get it. So I think they're looking for more than whether or not Joe Biden's from Scranton and she hunts. I think that's, what you're going to do about it.
Mm-hmm. But you tried really hard to reach these people. You went and sipped beer, which I know you don't particularly like. I mean,
Steve, I had a beer last night. I mean, where do these stories come from, man?
I'm the one that doesn't drink.
Where does the story come from that I don't like beer?
Anyway,
come on, man.
You even tried bowling.
Now, time out a second.
My question is, Senator...
I've got to defend my bowling honor here. It is true that my bowling score left something to be desired. The reason I bowled, though, wasn't to try to get votes. If I had been trying to get votes, I promise you I would have been avoiding a bowling alley. The reason I was there was to campaign, and we had great fun. But here's the bottom line. I wouldn't have been elected to the United States Senate out of Illinois
which is 12% African American, if I didn't have some broad appeal. You know, so the mythology that's developed that somehow I can't get those votes is refuted by the very fact that I'm sitting in this chair.
Is that one of the reasons you picked Senator Biden?
What reason is that, Steve?
You said you've got Joe Biden working for you in Pennsylvania.
Well,
states like Pennsylvania.
Let me tell you the reason I picked Joe Biden. Number one, he can step in and become president, and I don't think anybody has any doubt about that. Number two is that if I'm in the room making the kinds of tough decisions that the next president's going to have to make, both on domestic policy and on international policy, then I want the counsel and advice of somebody who's not going to agree with me 100% of the time. In fact, somebody who's independent enough that can push back and give me different perspectives and make sure that I'm catching any blind spots that I have. And Joe Biden doesn't bite his tongue.
You've had some differences over pretty substantial issues. Iraq, for one.
Actually, we haven't. Look, Barack was right. He not only got it right about being against the war, I got it wrong about underestimating the incompetence of this administration when we gave the president the power we gave him at the time. He knew accurately that not even being outside, maybe it gave you better perspective, that meant he was going to war. Bush told me he wasn't going to war. I thought they meant it. You're standing outside. You knew they didn't mean it.
Well, one of the reasons that I love Joe, and one of the reasons I think he's going to be such an effective vice president, is he's blunt when he's right and he's blunt when he's wrong. And that means that I can trust his counsel. And that's what I think a president needs from a vice president. Look, there is no choice I could have made where the person's going to agree with me 100% of the time, and I wouldn't want that person. Michelle doesn't agree with me 100% of the time. In fact, with Michelle, if I can get to 50%, I'm feeling pretty good. What you want is somebody whose core values you believe in, who you trust, who you think is a straight shooter.
I mean, you have had, you from time to time put your foot in your mouth?
Sure I have.
I'm certain that Senator Obama was aware of that.
I'm confident. Everybody's aware of it.
Right. There was an issue in 1988 involving plagiarism, which I'm sure the Republicans are working on a campaign commercial now about.
I'm sure that's probably true.
What have you learned about politics and running for office in those 20 years?
I made a mistake. I made a mistake 21, 22 years ago. I was arrogant. I didn't think I had to prepare. I showed up at a debate and I failed to quote somebody, a guy named Neil Kinnock. And I just asked people and everyone else, look at the last 20 years of my career since that allegation occurred. But I think that I have a record that people can go back and examine and decide whether or not I mean what I say, whether, no matter how I say it, whether I'm consistent with what I've asserted I care about. That's all I care about. And but, there's going to be a lot, I'm sure, a lot of things said about it.
I like who he is, and I think the American people will. And I think together we're going to win this election. Joe's going to end up being one of the finest vice presidents we've ever had.
Have you talked, have you spoken specifically about what your role would be in an Obama administration?
Yes. He had just a few questions that were important to him, but were threshold questions. If we didn't pass that threshold, he wasn't interested.
I don't want to go and just hang out. I could help Barack a lot more from chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee or from the United States Senate. But when he indicated to me he was looking for me to give me my best judgment and for him to consider it, that's good enough for me. I'm not looking for a portfolio. I'm not looking for anything other than to be able to be part of the change this guy's been talking about, and very bluntly, I've been talking about.
What's your role in the campaign? Can you make a difference in this race, and how do you do that?
The thing I can do is hopefully go into Scranton and Wilmington and Sacramento and other places and say, I know the guy. Politicians know quality when they see it in other politicians.
Did you mean that as a compliment?
As a compliment. Look, I tell you why.
Because he's spent most of this campaign trying to separate himself.
Well, let me tell you, he is separate. But here's the bottom line. The thing about him that everybody misunderstands, and this Boss, here we go. We may have our first difference here. But all kidding aside, here's the deal. Everybody knows the way he's caught on to this yearning in the American public. But the second piece of that is not only the idealism, you got to be tough. You got to be tough to be the President of the United States of America. And if you don't have political good sense, if you're not politically tough, let me tell you something. I don't want you to be my president.
And you think he is?
Absolutely.
But one of the weaknesses in terms of this campaign is that there are people out there who don't think that you have a punch, that you are not that a killer instinct, that you are a very deliberative, judicious person who prides himself on building consensus, but it is not in your DNA to be confrontational.
The fact that I don't go out of my way to call people names or try to take cheap shots, and that I try not to throw the first punch, but to see if I can find a way to work together with people, sometimes leads people to underestimate what I've got. I think it's fair to say that if I couldn't not only take a punch but occasionally throw one, I wouldn't be sitting here.
You've just come through a very historic week. I mean, politically, this is a real milestone in American history. But yet, there was almost no mention made of it. You made no mention of it, and the Democratic Party made almost no mention of it. Why is that? I mean, you're the first black person ever to be nominated by a major party.
Yeah, I think people noticed that.
You didn't think you needed to bring to their attention?
I think people understood the significance of it.
Is part of it the fact that you don't want to be considered as a black candidate?
Well, look, it is absolutely true that I want to be the president for all America. You know, this is not a symbolic exercise on my part. I intend to win this race so that I can work on behalf of all families in America. If I can get health care for every American, if I can make sure that the economy is providing jobs that pay a decent wage, if I can solve this energy problem so that we're more secure, if I can make an education system work for every child, then that's going to be good for black Americans, that's going to be good for Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, white Americans. That's going to be good for everybody.
One last question. You are running against the record of an administration that is one of the most unpopular in the history of the country.
Good reason.
And there are people that believe that you should be much farther ahead in the polls than you are.
Yeah.
What do you say to that, and are you comfortable with the way this race is going and where you are right now?
Look, this is going to be a rough, tough battle. The Republicans don't govern very well, but they know how to campaign. And you know, what I would expect is that it's going to take mid-October before a whole lot of people start making up their minds. And there's nothing wrong with that. This notion that somehow this should be a cakewalk and I should just walk into the election with you know, a 10, 15-point lead, you know, I think doesn't give the American people enough credit. They want to get this thing right.
We've offered Senator McCain and Governor Palin the same opportunity to appear on 60 Minutes and look forward to having them on soon.